You have been deceived. From the very first day you opened a history textbook in school until the moment you first entered a museum hall to gaze upon ancient statues, you were told that time is merciless. You were instilled with the idea that wind, sand, and rain erase the facial features of great rulers of the past. But look closer. Move closer to the screen. Why is it that thousands of statues found on different continents, from Egypt to South America, from Rome to India, are missing precisely the nose? Why does time so selectively attack this particular part of the face, leaving ears, hair, and even delicate folds of clothing untouched? This is not erosion. This is not an accident. This is a surgically precise operation to erase the memory of an entire civilization. We have been lied to our entire lives about who truly built this world. Have you ever wondered why official historians react so nervously to questions about chipped faces? They feed us tales of vandals, religious fanatics, or Napoleonic soldiers who supposedly practiced shooting at the Sphinx. But let's engage critical thinking and simple logic. Imagine the scale. We are talking not about tens, but hundreds of thousands of statues across the planet. Many of them are made of granite, basalt, and diorite. These are rocks of incredible hardness. Try taking a hammer and chisel and chipping off the nose of a granite statue without damaging the rest of the head. It would take you hours, if not days, of arduous physical labor. Now multiply that by the number of museums and archaeological sites worldwide. Someone performed a colossal task. Someone spent millions of man-hours not on creation, but on the targeted destruction of identifying features. Why? The answer is frightening in its simplicity and cynicism. The face is a passport. The nose, brow ridges, shape of the chin, and lips unmistakably reveal racial origin. If you see a face, you know who is before you. And it is this knowledge that is most dangerous for those who rewrote history in the 19th and 20th centuries. They defaced them so that you would never guess that the builders of pyramids, ancient temples, and incredible cathedrals had nothing in common with the peoples who live in these territories today. This was not a war against stone. This was a war against the genetic memory of humanity. Official science claims that ancient Egyptians built pyramids using copper chisels and ropes, but look at the statues of pharaohs from that period. Perfect symmetry, polishing, impossible without lathes and high technology. И у большинства этих статуй сбиты носы. Почему? Потому что если бы мы увидели их истинные лица, вся хронология, выстроенная академиками, рассыпалась бы в прах. Возможно, эти лица принадлежали людям европеоидной расы там, где их быть не должно. Или наоборот, мы увидели бы черты тех, кого принято считать примитивными народами, но кто владел технологиями полетов и лазерной резки. Или же это были лица гигантов, о которых нам запрещено знать? Уничтожение лиц — это акт присвоения чужой собственности. Представьте, что вы захватили чужой дворец, полностью оборудованный, с мебелью, картинами и библиотекой. Вы не можете построить такой же, у вас нет ни знаний, ни инструментов. Но вы хотите жить в нем и называться его хозяином. Что вы сделаете первым делом? Вы сорвете портреты прежних владельцев со стен. А если портреты высечены в камне и являются частью несущих колонн, вы возьмете кувалду и собьете им лица, чтобы ваши дети, которые вырастут в этом дворце, никогда не узнали, что они всего лишь сквоттеры, заселившиеся в руины более развитой цивилизации. Взгляните на статуи в Индии. Храмовые комплексы, вырезанные из единой скалы, поражают воображение. И снова та же картина. Лица божеств и героев обезображены. Историки говорят нам, это сделали завоеватели иной веры. Допустим. Но почему завоеватели, обладая лишь примитивным оружием, тратили столько сил на аккуратное удаление носов, вместо того, чтобы просто развалить статуи целиком? Это выглядит как выполнение четкого приказа сверху. Инструкция по сокрытию улик. Словно по всему миру прошла зондеркоманда с одной единственной целью обезличить прошлое. Мы стоим на пороге грандиозного разоблачения. Статистика – вещь упрямая. Вероятность того, что у 5000 статуй случайно отвалится именно нос, равна нулю. Это математическая невозможность. Значит, мы имеем дело с умыслом. И этот умысел глобален. Он не знает границ государств. Тот, кто отдавал этот приказ, владел миром или, по крайней мере, контролировал информационное поле на всех континентах одновременно. Это заставляет нас по-новому взглянуть на события недавнего прошлого. Что, если так называемая античность была не 1000 лет назад, а совсем недавно? Что, если катастрофа, уничтожившая прежний мир, произошла всего 200 или 300 лет назад? И те, кто пришел к власти после нее, начали массовую зачистку. Они обнаружили города, полные величественных памятников. Города, в которых еще стояли статуи реальных строителей, реальных правителей мира. These statues looked at the new masters of life with silent reproach. Their faces revealed a truth that could not be allowed into textbooks. Have you ever noticed how strange many Roman busts look? A head made of one marble and a nose attached from another, clearly later. This is called restoration, but it looks more like plastic surgery for identity change. We are being fed fakes. We are shown Frankensteins assembled from fragments and told, "These are your ancestors." But intuition whispers something else. You feel a dissonance when you look at these dead, altered faces. In this video, we will examine facts that will make your hair stand on end. We will analyze the technical capabilities of those times and prove that it was impossible to deface thousands of basalt colossi without industrial equipment. We will compare the dates of so-called barbarian invasions and periods of iconoclasm to see a hidden pattern. We will peer into an abyss of falsification that has lasted for several centuries. Prepare yourselves. What you learn next will force you to reconsider not only history, but also your place in this world. For if they so diligently hid the faces of our predecessors, then the secret of their origin is the key to understanding who we truly are and why we are governed precisely in this way. Official history is bursting at the seams. Contradictions are emerging from all cracks. How to explain that mummies of white people in clothes with Celtic patterns are found in China, while statues in Central America have distinctly Semitic or African features, which were then painstakingly defaced? Globalization existed long before that word was invented. The world was united, and it was inhabited by a civilization whose power we are only beginning to comprehend. But someone very influential decided to press the erase button. Someone decided that humanity should forget its true parents and accept adoptive ones appointed by the system. Let's move from general suspicions to stubborn facts of materials science, which demolish the official world view like a house of cards. Take any geology handbook and find the Mohs scale. This is a scale of mineral hardness. Copper and bronze, the main tools that historians attribute to ancient builders, have a hardness of about 3 or 4 units. Granite, basalt, and diorite, from which the most magnificent and mysterious statues are made, have a hardness of 6 to 8 units. To try to work diorite with a bronze chisel is like trying to cut steel rebar with a wooden ruler. The tool will be destroyed within the first few minutes, while the stone will remain unharmed. However, we are told that fanatics or barbarians defaced statues using precisely such primitive tools. Have you ever tried hitting a granite boulder with a hammer? Sparks will fly, your hand will go numb. But to chip off a neat piece precisely in the nose area, without cracking the statue's skull in the process, is practically impossible without a high-speed tool with diamond coating. The nature of the damage on many Egyptian colossi indicates the use of machine technology. The chips are even, often bearing traces of grinding, as if the face was not just knocked off, but cut with a giant milling cutter. This is industrial dismantling, not an act of vandalism by a drunken mob. Look at the statues in Luxor and Karnak. Many of them stand at a height of 10 or 15 meters. To reach their faces, complex scaffolding would need to be erected. Are you suggesting that invaders who stormed the city with the aim of looting and killing stopped, spent weeks building scaffolding, climbed up with heavy tools just to chip off the nose of a stone idol? This is absurd. Such a thing is possible only in one case: if it was a systematic state program of a new power, provided with resources, labor, and time. It was a bureaucratic order. Erase the faces of predecessors at any cost. There is a term that historians are reluctant to discuss: the usurpation of monuments. The most striking example is Pharaoh Ramesses II. His name is carved on thousands of statues, obelisks, and temples. But upon detailed analysis, it is evident that his cartouches are often carved over older and higher quality inscriptions, sometimes even crudely and crookedly. But the most terrible thing happened with the faces. Researchers of alternative history notice a strange disproportion. On many statues of Ramesses, the head appears too small in relation to the powerful body. Broad shoulders, gigantic torso, but the head is disproportionately small. Do you know why? Because it is a recarved head. Originally, the statue depicted someone else, someone with completely different facial features, perhaps a representative of another race or even species. The new masters of life could not destroy these eternal monuments. They lacked the guts to build their own. Therefore, they ordered stonemasons to cut off the excess layer of stone and carve their own face onto the remnants. Thus, noses became smaller, cheekbones narrower, and the head itself lost volume. This was plastic surgery on stone, designed to appropriate someone else's grandeur. But where recarving was impossible due to the risk of structural destruction, faces were simply completely knocked off, leaving a smooth spot or a rough chip. Special attention should be paid to the polygonal masonry and megalithic structures of Peru. Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo. The official version states that the Incas built this by knocking stones against each other. But any engineer will tell you that fitting multi-ton blocks with such precision that a razor blade cannot pass between them requires 21st century level technology. And what do we see there? Defaced countenances of gods. Spanish conquistadors wrote that the Incas themselves did not know who built these structures. They said that the cities had already stood here for thousands of years before their arrival. The Incas simply settled into the ruins, just as we today might settle into an abandoned skyscraper. And the faces on the ancient monoliths were destroyed by Catholic priests, declaring them diabolical. But there's a nuance. On some blocks, traces of face destruction are found beneath a layer of ancient plaster, or later Incan masonry itself. That is, the faces were destroyed even before the Incas. By whom? And whose faces were they? Let's move to Mexico. The famous giant Olmec heads, huge basalt boulders weighing tens of tons. They have wide noses, full lips, clearly Negroid African features. But wait, official history claims that there were no contacts between Africa and America before Columbus. These heads are a bone in the throat of academic science. And do you know what was done with them? Many of them were found intentionally buried in the ground or thrown into ravines. On some, there are visible traces of attempts at destruction, deep grooves and indentations. Someone very much did not want these stone testimonies of ancient transoceanic voyages to see the light of day. For if Africans, or a race similar to them, built civilizations in Mexico 3,000 years ago, then the entire map of history that is drawn for us is false. And now recall the winged bulls with human heads from Assyria. Masterpieces preserved in museums. Many of them have precisely their noses and eyes damaged. It is believed that conquerors believed the statue was alive, and by gouging out its eyes and breaking its nose, they deprived it of its power and ability to harm. A beautiful fairy tale for tourists, but why then did they not touch the wings or legs? After all, the bull could run away or kick. No, the blow was aimed at genetics. The blow was aimed at anthropological features. Information about the skull shape, eye cut, and profile was destroyed. Look at the statues of Buddha in Afghanistan, destroyed in our time. This is a clear example of how it works, but ancient cleanups were far more extensive. We find traces of machine processing on statues that are officially dated millennia BC, traces of circular saws, tubular drills, and it is these high-tech artifacts that are most often depersonalized. A chilling picture emerges. A civilization that possessed high technologies disappeared or was destroyed, and its place was taken by people with hammers and chisels who, in impotent rage and fear of the ancestors' grandeur, began to erase their faces. They feared not the stone, they feared comparison. If a simple 19th century peasant had seen a statue of a god with a European face deep in the Asian jungles, or a statue with an African face in the Andes, he would have started asking questions for which the church and kings had no answers. Faces were defaced to make history flat, linear, and safe for the ruling elites, to instill in every nation that it had always lived right here, in isolation, and never had contact with other worlds. Divide and conquer, a principle that works not only in politics but also in history. By depersonalizing the past, they divided humanity. But that's not all. There is evidence that some statues had not just other facial features. There are descriptions and sketches by travelers of past centuries depicting statues with physiological characteristics not inherent to modern humans. Elongated skulls, strange ear structures, different facial bone proportions. Where are these statues now? Some of them have been restored beyond recognition. Some are hidden in storerooms, access to which is closed even to professors, and some have been destroyed to dust. The war against monuments is a war for the purity of the species. Someone very diligently maintains the illusion that man is the pinnacle of creation and the only intelligent species that ever inhabited Earth. Let's broaden the scope. Let's move away from individual statues and look at the cities where they stood. Defaced faces are just a marker, a small detail of a huge operation to change ownership of real estate on a planetary scale. To understand why the facial features of the builders were destroyed, one must realize the impossibility of 19th century architecture itself existing within the framework of official history. Let's look at what was happening on the other side of the world, in the so-called New World. Look at old photographs of American state capitals from the mid-19th century. Iowa, Texas, Michigan. We are shown black and white pictures. Dirt roads, knee-deep mud, wooden wagons, people in simple frock coats and hats. And in the background, a gigantic capitol rises. A massive domed structure in an antique style, with colonnades, marble staircases, and intricate stucco work. The official version states that these masterpieces were built by settlers who only had saws, hammers, and horse-drawn power as tools. Do you seriously believe that people who had barely managed to build wooden barracks for shelter and were struggling for survival in wild territories would, as their first priority, erect gigantic Roman palaces? Where were the brick factories? Where were the marble quarries? Where were the railways to transport thousands of tons of stone? They weren't there. Logistics were absent. But the buildings already stood, and they stood not as new constructions, but as ancient, weathered objects that often required repair. We arrive at a shocking conclusion. The so-called colonization of America was not the discovery of new lands, but the settlement of empty cities after a global cleanup. And these cities were full of statues depicting the true masters of these palaces. The new settlers, these cowboys and pioneers, were strictly ordered to destroy the faces of the former gods. This is precisely why thousands of fragments of ancient statues lie in the basements of American museums, found in the earth during subway construction or excavations. They were simply thrown from their pedestals and buried to create the myth of the Wild West, which supposedly needed to be civilized. This also explains the widespread phenomenon of buried floors. Walk through the center of any historic city, be it Kazan, Prague, or Chicago. Everywhere you will see windows disappearing into the ground, windows that lead nowhere, abutting the soil. Historians call this the cultural layer, but no amount of debris can uniformly bury entire continents 3 to 4 meters deep in clay. This is the consequence of a flood. A mud flood that destroyed a previous highly developed civilization. And now for the most terrifying part. Where did the people go? Look at the demographic peculiarities of the mid-19th century. In the United States of America, there is the phenomenon of orphan trains. Hundreds of thousands of children were transported from the East Coast to the West and given to foster families. Documents about their parents are missing. Where did this army of homeless children come from? Where are all the adults? There is a theory that makes one's blood run cold. We are a civilization of orphans. Current humanity is a product of artificial population recovery after a catastrophe. We were grown in incubators or gathered as surviving children, had their memories erased, and a new history instilled. We were settled into ready-made but catastrophe-destroyed cities. We were given primitive technologies, coal and shovels, even though we sat amidst buildings designed for atmospheric electricity and free energy. The defaced noses on statues are an element of the Matrix's psychological defense. If these orphan children had seen the faces of their true parents, giants, Atlanteans, people with different genetics, they would understand that they are strangers here. Or conversely, they would understand that they had been degraded to the level of service personnel. Faces were defaced to sever the connection between generations, so that we would think that history is linear, from ape to iPhone. But in reality, history is an cardiogram, where peaks of highest development are replaced by plunges into the Stone Age. Look at the fireplaces in old buildings. They are enormous. A person of average height can enter without bending over. We are told that these were for heating with firewood. But these fireplaces often have no chimneys, or they are decorative. Engineers of alternative history suggest that these were energy generation installations, working in tandem with domes and spires on roofs. The metal in these structures bears traces of high-frequency exposure, not fire. When the new masters of the world seized these technologies, they did not understand how to use them. They turned generators into wood-burning stoves. They turned temples of science into religious cults. And the statues of scientists and engineers holding devices in their hands, which we now take for scepters and orbs, they depersonalized. By defacing the face and damaging the tools in the statue's hands, they transformed a technical manual into an idol for worship. We live in a world of cargo cult. We copy the external forms of democracy, Roman law, ancient architecture, but we have lost the essence. We use the fragments of a great civilization, like savages who found a laptop, and use it as a cutting board. And so that we would not guess this, someone very thoroughly went through all the museums of the world with a hammer. This lie is maintained to this day. Think about why, during any modern conflicts in the Middle East, museums are plundered first and foremost. Why are ancient cities such as Palmyra destroyed? Who is bothered by old stones? It's not about gold, it's about information. There, in the storerooms of Baghdad and Cairo, artifacts were kept that they did not manage to destroy in the 19th century. Artifacts with undefaced faces. Artifacts showing Earth's connection to space. They had to be removed and hidden away before independent researchers with cameras and the internet could get to them. The war with the past continues right now. Live while we think it's a fight for oil. Now that we have realized the scale of the substitution of architecture and history, let's look into the darkest room of this labyrinth. Let's talk about biology and why the destruction of faces was not just a political act, but a species-level one. Look at yourself in the mirror. And then look at the proportions of those very ancient statues, even the depersonalized ones. Do you see the difference? It's not about the idealization of art. It's about physical parameters, the width of the rib cage, the structure of the muscular corset, the ratio of limb lengths. These statues depict beings who were biologically more perfect than us. We were taught that evolution moves from simple to complex, that we become taller, stronger, and smarter than our ancestors. But the facts scream the opposite. We are a degenerating branch. We live 70 years and spend half our lives battling diseases. Those whose faces were defaced by the hammers of invaders probably lived for centuries. Their bodies were designed for a different atmosphere, a different pressure, a different gravity. By defacing their faces, the parasitic system was not just hiding a race, it was hiding a standard. It was destroying a benchmark against which we could compare ourselves and understand how much we have diminished. Imagine a kennel where ornamental dogs are bred. So that they wouldn't feel inferior, the owners remove all images of wolves, their strong and free ancestors. We are these ornamental species in a global human hive. We were bred, reduced in size, with our genetic potential curtailed and brain capacities blocked, which were once the norm. And statues are accidental reminders of who we were before selection, before we were rebooted. This is where the most terrifying answer to the question why lies. The face is the mirror of the soul and intellect. By defacing the face, the jailers of this planet performed a symbolic lobotomy on all of humanity. They turned subjects of history into objects of cult worship. When you look at a statue without a face, you experience subconscious fear and awe before an unknown force. This is psycholinguistic programming. A faceless God is a terrifying God. You cannot look him in the eye, you cannot negotiate with him. You can only obey him. This was an operation to erase ancestral memory. If you had seen the face of Zeus or Apollo and recognized the features of your grandfather in it, you would understand that you are their direct descendants. You would straighten your back, you would demand your inheritance back. But looking at a chipped piece of marble, you see only cold eternity to which you have no relation. You have been convinced that you are slaves of God, not children of gods. Do you feel the difference? A slave has no right to the master's property. A son does. It was precisely to deprive us of the right to the planet's inheritance that they took up chisels. The theory of cyclical catastrophes explains this as a harvest mechanism. Imagine that a civilization develops to a certain level, reaches the peak of technology and spiritual growth, and then the great harvest occurs. They arrive, or a natural cleansing mechanism is activated, cities become empty, and then a new batch of biomass, us, is introduced into the ruins. We are given scraps of knowledge, rewritten books, and a religion of humility. But the stones remain, and so that the new batch does not guess that they are not the first here, and most likely not the last, the traces of the previous batch are carefully cleaned up. Defaced noses are a seal of silence. It is the censor's signature on the body of history. But there is another aspect that is unsettling. Genetic experiments. Perhaps many statues did not depict entirely human beings. Chimeras, centaurs, dog-headed people, we consider these myths. But what if this was the reality of genetic engineering of the past? What if our world was inhabited by dozens of intelligent species that coexisted together, and the force that seized power adheres to the principle of purity and unification? They destroyed all species except one, the most obedient and easily manageable, that is, us. They defaced the statues of beastmen and giants with particular ferocity, so that we would consider ourselves the pinnacle of creation and the only form of intelligent life in the universe. This creates in us a feeling of loneliness and hopelessness. We are trapped on this little ball, and we have nowhere to run. But if we knew that there used to be an intergalactic port and a melting pot of races here, we would start looking for a way out. We would start looking for technologies of displacement, not ways to burn hydrocarbons. Remember the feeling when you leave a museum? Tiredness, emptiness. This is not accidental. Museums are not repositories of memory. They are cemeteries of truth. Everything there is arranged to confuse you, to distort chronology, to mix errors. Broken faces look at you from display cases, and this silent scream penetrates the subconscious. This is trauma, passed down from generation to generation. Мы – цивилизация с посттравматическим синдромом, которая не помнит самого травмирующего события. Но система дала сбой. Они не смогли уничтожить все. Масштаб строительства был таким колоссальным, что даже миллионной армии фальсификаторов не хватило рук стереть каждый барельеф. То тут, то там всплывают артефакты с уцелевшими лицами. И эти лица смотрят на нас с укором и надеждой. Они как капсулы времени, оставленные для тех, кто сможет проснуться. Задумайтесь, почему в последние годы так активно продвигается тема цифровизации и виртуальной реальности, потому что физическая реальность полна улик. Камни говорить не умеют, но они не умеют и врать. А в цифровом мире можно нарисовать любую историю. Можно окончательно стереть лица, заменив их аватарами. Мы стоим на пороге нового этапа зачистки. То, что делали молотками в XIX веке, сегодня делают алгоритмами в XXI. История снова переписывается прямо на наших глазах, и мы снова рискуем потерять свое лицо, теперь уже в цифровом смысле. Гнев, который вы сейчас чувствуете, это правильная реакция. Это пробуждение генетической памяти. Вам врали о вашем происхождении. Вас заставили поверить, что ваши предки были дикарями, которые с палками бегали за мамонтами, в то время как они строили звездные форты и управляли энергией эфира. Вас ограбили, лишив памяти величия. И понимание этого – первый шаг к тому, чтобы перестать быть скотом в их загоне.